out there, beautiful people, couples, aspirational individuals looking for romance, love. This is Jocelyn, the founder of Happy Partners Project, a check-in process for checking in on your relationship. And I am with GS Youngblood, the author of this book right here, The Masculine in Relationship. I'm telling you, I love this book so much. Look at how many dog-eared pages are in there. That's how much gold is in this book. And I was so excited that you and I are sitting down today to talk through the masculine and this blueprint that you have created, which has provided so much insight for me as a woman. I know I'm not your target audience for
Yeah.
the book, but maybe you can start there and just tell us a little bit about how this came to be and the blueprint that you created.
Sure. Well, let me first just say it's great to be on here with you, Jocelyn. I was excited for this conversation and glad to share this topic with you this morning. So I started out on this journey in a ball of flames, which was a divorce that happened about 10 years ago. And I was married to a very strong woman at the time. And, you know, it's enticing. She was like smart and accomplished and confident. And it was all those things that drew me to her, yet I didn't necessarily know how to be with that strength and how to really complement the strength that she had with my own groundedness and power. I was lost in that regard. And so by the end of that relationship, I had really retreated back and let go of my preferences and boundaries and really just tried to keep the peace, which of course made her increasingly enraged and just made actually what I thought would make things better actually made things worse. And so coming out of that situation, I knew there had to be a better way. And so after about 12 years of men's work in the time since, in a one long-term relationship with a woman who was also very strong and feminine, and using that relationship to practice what works and what opens my feminine partner, what doesn't. At some point about 5 years ago, I started taking notes on things I was learning, either from other people or just through my own experience. And as that volume of notes grew, I knew I could put it into a book, which I did. And that is really what turned into what you see today, the book that you've got in your hand. And it's definitely been a labor of love. And everything in that book is very personal to me. It's something that I've actually lived through personally. So the topic matter is, like I said, very personal to me.
Well, and what strikes me is that it seems that there's been a little bit of a descent from the idea that polarity is essential, that it exists, that there is a masculine or a feminine, we're all just equal. I don't disagree with any of that at all, but I do think setting a framework around how you're viewing masculine energy in relation to feminine and the polarity dynamic that exists. Talk a little bit about that.
So I think where we can start is it's like, what is this polarity dynamic? Like, why the hell are we even talking about this? We're all the same. And I mean, just imagine at work, we're all the same because we're all humans. But at some point you need somebody to just stand up and be like, hey, this is where we're headed. And it's a relief to the people in the company to have somebody stand up and say, okay, this is the direction. Now, you have a similar dynamic in relationship. You can have two people, both who are very capable, both who can work full-time, get things done, be self-sufficient in a lot of ways with each other. But it's in those times of intimacy that if you're kind of the same, it's actually not that juicy. And I've experienced that in my own relationships. I've seen it with others where you're just kind of both the same. Whereas if you have what's called polarity, where you have kind of more of a directive energy and more of a receptive energy in those times of intimacy, that's when it can be actually really juicy. And that's the part of the case to be made for having a polarity dynamic. I mean, you and I talked about this when we did the other video. You're a powerful woman. And at time, I mean, you're getting stuff done. You've done 2 companies, and now you've got your 3rd project going right now. And there are still times where you want to just surrender into the lead of your male partner. And that's where polarity can come in. That's where, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, that's also just where it becomes so important for the feminine. You're obviously taking it from the perspective of, hey guys, you can step into your masculine leadership.
Yeah.
The way you position it so beautifully in the book that I love is about the masculine core. So you're like, it's just that center point of your energy field. So you can step into that. And I think also to the ladies out there watching that, it's about you equally receiving and being able to surrender and looking at the areas where you're expressed as you're hyper masculine, right? I have so many women who message me when I talk about the overexpressed masculine in a woman, and they're like, this is me, and how do I get out of my masculine? Because it's become so second nature. And that actually is why I really enjoyed reading your book, because I was like, yeah, like every time that something would come in, whether you were talking about there's 3 elements of the blueprint that GS has created, and it's structure, safety, and respond versus react. And every time we were going through one of those chapters, I had those aha yes moments, but also my responsibility on the other side of that to be in the allowing, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It's a choice to surrender on the feminine's part. It's not, unlike the old days where it was compulsion, now it's really a choice. And that's what I say to men is you're putting out an invitation now. It's not like, okay, now I'm in charge. I'm the man. It's like, here's my invitation for my leadership, and you can choose whether to pick it up or not. And as you pointed out, the blueprint is that it's that template for a man to say, just do this, because this, being in your masculine can baffle a lot of guys. And so the blueprint was really intended to give them something actionable that they can follow, like a real framework they can implement in their life.
So when we're talking about the distinction that you're making, which you do illustrate in the book, but for the people who are watching now, let's go a little bit deeper into that distinction about the previously understood definition of masculine and how you're reframing that in this book and with your work.
Yeah, I think what I said before really applies in the sense that it was compulsion. This masculine feminine dynamic was compulsion before, and it worked in a lot of ways. I mean, I know it's controversial for me to say that. In a lot of ways it worked because you just sort of had a lead and you have a follow, just like it worked when you've got differing levels of the corporation. You know who's leading and you know who's following. So there was something about that was good, but now it's a choice. It's an invitation. It's not compulsion, and that puts the pressure on the men because it's no longer they're no longer anointed in some kind of role of leadership. They actually have to earn it, and they earn it through the blueprint. This was my offering to what they need to do to start to add leadership. You have to learn to be more grounded. To be more choiceful. And that's what the first element of the blueprint is about. You have to learn to offer structure in the relationship, whether it's decisiveness or clarity or structures for how you'll do things, but offer them in an inclusive way. And you have to create emotional, physical, and financial. You have to create emotional safety. You can also go to physical and financial, but that's separate. But you have to create emotional safety for your woman. And those are the ways that you earn in this new world where nothing is by compulsion and nothing is taken for granted, where you're having to earn it. These are the 3 elements that you can manifest in your life to really earn your woman's choice to surrender to your lead, at least in times of intimacy.
Well, and so one of the core elements that you talk about is to respond versus react. And this, I think, is so. I think every woman out there can identify when she has had a frustration and her guy immediately comes back to her with, well, but I did, and like, I love this one, pulling out the cell phone and saying, well, let's go back and see, actually, what time did I send that? To compare notes of like, well, you're saying I sent it at noon, but I think I sent, let's go look at exactly what I said here. And it's like, this is just really not effective in understanding the female perspective when she's flared up and like hyper vigilant on her emotional state, right? Yeah. What do you say to guys about responding versus reacting in that kind of scenario?
Well, I'm going to bounce right off the scenario you just said. I have a very, very short phrase in the book: feelings first, facts later. And it really, like, you can almost encompass the whole part of this of the blueprint in that. It's like we always want to go to facts, and we're whipping out the cell phone, as you said, and saying, what time did I send that text? And I had to laugh because I've actually been in that situation. So I just, it's like just laughing at the absurdity of the truth in that.
I'm sure there are so many people on the listening end, the guys who are listening to this, that are like, I do that.
Like, ooh, I did that. Yeah, totally. And it's our nature. So let's be gentle on ourselves, men, but you got to know, this is what I say. I just say, look, stop doing what doesn't work. And you've got to go to that feeling level first. So, you know, it really requires you, when your woman is emotional, you have to meet her in that emotional space before bringing up any facts or defending or explaining. Once you do that, once you meet her in that emotional place, and we can talk about what that means, then later she's way, way more open to the facts and having sort of more of a rational discussion about it. But you've got to have the emotional discussion first. And, you know, Jocelyn, that often takes the form of just empathy, just acknowledging what your woman is feeling in the moment. And it could be like, oh, you know what, baby, of course you feel that way, and that's my bad. So it could be where you're immediate, or it could be like, look, I did what I did and I had my reasons, but I can see that it had a really tough effect on you. And it makes sense that you would feel that way. So whether you're taking responsibility or not, you're going first to acknowledging her feelings. And that's generally how I advise men to proceed, even though that's way easier said than done.
And we've talked about previously in our other conversation, we talked about culpability. So let's bring that into the conversation a little bit about when you're showing up for your partner's emotions. It's not necessarily saying, okay, I was wrong and I am bad for doing this, right? It's saying, I can see how this affected you, or I can see that you're hurting right now. It may not even be like how, maybe you don't fully understand how she got from A to B to C to D to where now she's flared up, but you can see that she's frustrated. And even just that acknowledgement of the experience that she's in can bring her down to, okay, I'm feeling, I'm seen, and my partner is acknowledging where I'm at, and now we can move forward, right?
Yeah. Well, that's the catnip here for the feminine, is being seen. You guys want to be seen for what is actually happening in the moment. And I love it. And men tend to go towards culpability a little too readily, like, whose fault is this? Because that's sort of the more factual analysis of it. You know, men, let that go. There's another phrase in the book: hear the pain, not the blame. And you know, either there's overt blame or you're projecting her blaming you. Like, it can actually happen both ways. Like, push that aside. Just hear that your baby's in pain. That's all you have to do. Just like you would your 5-year-old daughter. You know, if your daughter's in pain, you're not going to try to convince her not to be, you know, upset. You're going to hold her and reassure her. And that's often what the feminine is wanting. And so men, get away from the word that you use, Jocelyn, of culpability and whose fault is this? Like, stop playing that game. Just tune into the now. Like, oh, baby, come here, and just pull her in, even though you probably feel like she's radioactive and you don't want anything to do with her and be within 10 feet. You go over there and you pull her in, you know, and in 90% of the cases, that's going to have an amazing effect. Not all cases, but most of them.
So how would you coach one of your clients, a guy that you're working with, on this particular element of the blueprint when he literally is under siege? Because we know that and I'm going to say this is a tactic and a trait that many people use, but there's some of the areas that I coach in the deck are, you know, not character assassinating, you know, working to not use hyperbolic language like you always or you never, right? But I think that this ends up coming up quite easily for women to be able to go into attack mode, right? And if you're being attacked, it seems natural that the masculine, who has been a you know, fighter type of energy for a long time, to go like, okay, attack back. What do you say to like interrupt that process, interrupt that moment when it's like, holy hell, I just want to attack back?
Yep, totally. It's all about the nervous system. When you settle when the nervous system is jacked up, pretty much you're always going to fail. You're going to do something that is basically counterproductive. It's all about settling the nervous system. And my experience, my direct experience, I'm not just talking theory, like this is my life. The more I settle my nervous system through various means, everything just gets easier. Like, I don't even have to, like, I just end up doing the right things without even knowing what I'm supposed to be doing differently. You know, just because my nervous system is more settled, I have more capacity for humor. I don't project as much. And so everything just seems a little easier. So I think for me, over the last 10 years, the world hasn't changed. It's like my nervous system settled down, and it just seems different. Everything seems much easier for me than it did, you know, even just a few years ago, quite frankly. So that's my answer to your question is, men, it's not, the first thing you have to do before any of the techniques is learn to settle your nervous system. And for men, I always recommend a daily embodiment practice. And this is what I teach each and every one of my clients. We do 15 minutes of embodiment at the beginning of our sessions, and I encourage them to have a daily practice of meditation, breathing, and movement. And I have specific exercises. And so really it all comes down to that. It's keeping yourself out of that state of threat, that fight or flight. Everything will get easier for you. Everything. In terms of this, moments of intensity.
And one of those tactics that you encourage readers of the book, and obviously your client base and the men you work with, is the meditation that you actually developed yourself as well, the provocation meditation, to further train the nervous system to be able to go into the fire, go into the hard feelings and the triggers that you already maybe are aware of that you have, and actually like spend time with them and get cozy and comfortable and actually go provoke yourself in this meditative state, right?
Yeah. That's the challenge, is you don't have a lot of practice sessions. So where you're in front of your woman and she's upset, and it's like, okay, cool, now I get to practice my techniques. It just never works that way. So by having this mental exercise where you're provoking yourself into those feelings sort of in the privacy of your own meditation cushion, then you can learn to be with those feelings. It's an acclimation process, just like you would acclimate to a cold pool. You need to acclimate to the physical, the emotional intensity of your feelings. And so I have a number of ways, including provocation meditation, to do that.
I thought that was just genius when I read it. I thought, wow, like to actually use your meditative practice when you've brought your nervous system down, to actually then go into a replicated state or context that would normally trigger you, and sort of practice that in your own field, I think was just so smart. So thank you for that contribution and for putting that together. You also talk about creating safety in the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see safety and protection as the same thing? And how do you distinguish between the two, if not?
Well, those are two very broad words. Protection often is, I think, associated with physical. I don't know. Is that kind of what you're referring to? Yeah. So look, there's physical, financial, and emotional safety. So let's maybe touch on each of those things.
Sure.
Let's do financial first, because this is the trickiest one, right? Because so many women are just earning their own money. So it's not like you've got to provide for the woman in a lot of cases these days.
Well, I also think there's a lot of noise that women have about noise, and also inherited fears from previous generations about what that symbolizes. Mm-hmm. If they do surrender into their partner as the provider, what does that say if they can't provide for themselves, if there was a catastrophic event, or if the relationship doesn't go as planned, or whatever it might be, and all of a sudden they're like, well, I have not provided my own safety in this category, and now I'm even more at ends, trying to make ends meet.
Yeah, definitely some historic fears here. And I know that's what drives a lot of women to be like, screw this, I want to be independent, because I don't ever want to be at the mercy of the world, or, the largesse of man, where I'm totally dependent on that. But I think that if we just back it off to the guy's side for one moment on that, I think most women want to feel like their man is creating something in the world, and that creation is creating also some financial security, whether it's just his half or not. So, I have a friend he's a coach and a filmmaker, and he's not making a lot of money, and he's following his dream, but he's not making a lot of money. And he really, well, I should say that, but he could make a choice to go back to web development, but he doesn't. He wants to be a filmmaker. And his wife is constantly saying, what's your plan? What's your plan? And I can feel the tension on the tearing of their polarity because of it. And I just think that's an example of like, it's great to follow your dreams, but I think ultimately a lot of the feminine wants to feel like you're kind of producing in a certain way. It's not just like vanity projects and that never kind of turn into anything. So I think that's whether or not the man is actually providing for her. I think that this kind of dynamic needs to exist. She needs to feel like he's actually succeeding in a certain way. So that's financial. Physical is, you protect her in the streets against, the guy that tries to mug you. But I think that's a little too obvious. There's way more subtle things to do. Like my last relationship, I actually got her fire extinguishers. I got her an air horn. I put mace in her car. A bunch of those things where that would protect her. I would always make her text me when she got home after driving home late at night so that the loop was closed. And those were all ways that I could physically protect her.
Yes, I love that.
Yeah. So, men, sure, go learn Taekwondo and Krav Maga, but also do these other really thoughtful things. She's going to feel that. She's going to be like, oh, damn, he's caring for me. Like, that feels good. I mean, I think it'll hit her at a very primal level. So that's physical safety. And then emotional safety. It's what we talked about before. Part of it is validating your woman. Another big part is coming through on your word. When you say you're going to do something, you got to do it. Because if you don't, she doesn't feel your tethering. She can't feel you're not a fulcrum anymore around which she can orbit in terms of her expectations and orientation towards you and the world. And so coming through on your word is another way to create emotional safety, along with, validating her feelings and a number of other things that I list in the book. So this is to me, and Jocelyn, I'd love your reflection on this, but this is the safety creation is the number one thing you can do to have your woman open to you, sort of emotionally, physically, and in any other way.
Well, and I think the following through on your commitments is just huge, especially from the beginning of any relationship, right? It's very subtle signs of whether or not your partner can put their full trust and faith in you, because they know you're going to follow through on your word. I don't know if you're familiar with 4 agreements. I think it's so classic that one of the first 4 is to be impeccable with your word. And I think it ultimately comes back to this premise of trust is the foundation. And if you can't trust someone's word, how can you trust them in other categories? Is really where the brain goes. Yep. Even if you could trust them in other categories, the brain is like, well, this is a very simple thing to do. Say what you mean and mean what you say, and follow through. So I think that's like one of the most strong trust building tactics that you can have. And that ultimately trust creates safety. What about the situation when a woman is particularly flared up in the emotion of something, and she keeps, coming to her guy over and over and over again with these flared up emotions? In those moments, what are some ways that he can continue to create that safety? Obviously the respond and react, I think, probably starts that process, but what other ways can he do that?
Well, I've got a whole sort of list of, I think, 7 ways that you can respond to your woman when she's upset. And number 1 is, first and foremost, is, like we talked about, it's empathy. Because she just wants to be felt. Like, she doesn't, what I tell men is like, and this is a David Data thing, so I'm borrowing it from David. It's just like, the complaint is not always about the content of the complaint, And so if you get like kind of wrapped up in the words that she's saying in the moment and trying then to like refute the words, you're not going to reach her, and she's just going to get more fired up. What she wants is to be felt, and she wants to know that you feel what it's like to be in her state, and that's empathy. And so I really coach men a lot on empathy, and it does, as you said, take learning to ground yourself, the respond versus react first, and then from that place you can have the capacity to be like, to actually feel that instead of being in a protective. I think that's the problem, is when men go protective, they can't feel you. We're just clenching. So if I'm clenching, I can't feel you. So number 1, go to empathy. And, and sometimes empathy doesn't work. Sometimes you're like, what? I don't get this. Like, this is crazy. Then you go to curiosity. You just be honest. Be like, baby, I feel you. And I want you to know I'm right here, but I have no idea what's happening right now. And so I just, tell me more. I want to hear more about your upset. And that can, in some cases, can totally disarm. She's like, oh, okay, he's open to this. Cool. But empathy, never fake empathy, because I think your woman's going to feel that. So if you can't genuinely understand and try to feel what she's feeling, then you go to curiosity.
And you said in the book that you could do a very simple phrase, which I think is just, tell me more about that. Mm-hmm. Right? If you don't know the questions to ask to find what's underneath her flare up, you can go to that one simple phrase. Tell me more about that. Right? Yeah.
Tell me more. I want to hear more. Other things you can do are humor. Sometimes, I'm sorry, Jocelyn, but sometimes you ladies, like sometimes it is ridiculous. And men need to use humor to really save her. I hesitate to use those words, but I'm just going to kind of save her from her own turmoil where she's just spun out and she can't, like, humor demolishes drama. And so sometimes humor really works. And I'm guessing that you would agree that, a man who can bring in humor at the right times, it's really refreshing, because then you're like, okay, I'm being ridiculous. And then you trust that man more because he's actually led you to a place you couldn't go on your own in that moment. Yeah.
For
so
sure.
then, yeah. Now the dark side of that is when you try to use humor to dodge. And so men, one, don't use it to dodge the gravity of the moment. Use it judiciously. And then if it's not landing, if she's getting more pissed off, be like, all right, baby, sorry. I just wanted to try to lighten it up. Let me back off. And then back off, and don't just keep persisting with the humor. And then sometimes it gets to a boundary. Sometimes it's not okay. The emotional turmoil can turn into abuse. And sometimes it's like, no, we're not going to do that. And that's one thing I I would love to do, is like, no, we're not fighting right now. It's not happening.
But to be clear, there is a distinction that you make, which is that's not the same as running away and bouncing out of the conversation. So it is being able to say, hey, let's not do this right now. Or, hey, we're not going to go down the name calling, like to take the character assassination route. Like, hey, let's not go down the route of name calling. Continue to tell me more about what you're experiencing with the emotion or whatever it might be, where you're guiding her. But it does not mean like, hey, we're not doing this, I got to go, and sprinting out of the house and jumping in the car and driving away for 45 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And then coming back and expecting that the bomb is going to have calmed down and the smoke will have settled, and you're just going to walk back into the house and everything is going to be roses, back to normal.
Yeah. It speaks to that principle of boundaries have to be, if you're going to set a boundary, you have to stay in connection. It's not like, no, we're not doing that. And then, as you said, out the door. Because then you're like, oh, the connection just got severed. You're like, baby, I'm right here, but no. Yeah. I love you, and I'm still connected to you, and I'm still with you, but no. And so I think that's men, if you can maintain the connection through whatever you're doing, you're just going to be 100% more successful typically, because that's what she's craving, is the maintenance of that connection. And my experience is that 90% of the time that it's to the men, it seems crazy. It's because she feels the connection severed in a certain way that you're not sensing, and that's driving her batty. So, maintain the connection at all times, whatever you're doing.
And you so brilliantly call out, I think the ladies out there who are listening will agree, that the woman is the oracle in the relationship. She has this sense of intuition and can guide the relationship to a place that maybe the guy isn't aware of is even possible, or maybe not isn't seeing an element that she can see because of her intuitive nature. And I think that's really a brilliant way to help men understand to embrace her intuition, and that she may be seeing a blind spot that you're not fully aware of. It doesn't give her the right to attack at you, but slow down, and that curiosity can help you uncover that. It's just
that it took me a while to get that with my last partner. She was very intuitive, and there was a way I didn't like what she was sensing, so I would fight it. But over time, I learned to just basically shut the hell up to myself and just listen to her and see. And I don't have to agree, but I have to take it in. And I started to force myself to take it in, and then to my benefit, I learned a lot about myself by listening to her feminine intuition. It was actually kind of liberating after a while. It's like, oh, I don't have to fight this anymore. I have my own ready-made, radar that's going to help me pick things up that I'm not sensing. So I started to really enjoy it, even though it was hard at first.
What do you say about the ability to actively listen in conversation with your partner? I find that you are a very active listener and hold on to the conversation in a way that's, I feel, creates safety as well. And I think, I've done a video that talks about the importance of active listening in the relationship on both parties' parts. But where do you stand on active listening, and how is this come naturally to you, or have you had to work on being able to be an active listener?
Gosh, I have hesitating to sort of self-reflect. I think it's two things that aided me on my own journey for whoever I am right now that I would also recommend to men. Number one is, this whole settling the nervous system, the respond versus react. that actually makes you way more present. And really, you know, you were using the term active listening, but somebody who's a good listener is very present, and they're not waiting to speak. They're not feeling like triggered, so they got to like jump in with you know, a defense. They're not going to non sequiturs. Non sequiturs are often somebody who's not very present, you know, because I'm not in the flow with you in this moment.
Yeah.
You know, I'm kind of somewhere else in this. So what I say is only marginally connected to what you said.
Mm-hmm.
So settled nervous system and presence are the keys to being a very good listener. Well, I think I've developed my own presence over the years as I've settled my nervous system. But there's another element to this that I think is important to being a good listener. And actually, I've learned this one through a lot of work on the hard way is it's being engaging, you know, and I think for men, it's hard. We sometimes bottle up so much that it can sometimes feel like a one-way conversation with us. And so really being in touch with what's inside and being okay with sharing that, you know, it allows you to engage, being tuned into what am I feeling in the moment based on what you just did, and being able to play with that and be in a dance with you is really, I think, key to any man that's going to feel like a good interaction partner, you know, with their feminine partner. And I learned that the hard way. In a couple of cases, I can distinctly remember some lessons learned about being more engaged with my woman. And even when it's tough, like staying engaged when I wanted to bolt the hell out of there. And that's part of it.
It's like the commitment to the growth, right? It's the commitment to actually leaving an old way that you've done it before, which is maybe to turn and bolt, and saying, okay, I'm going to stay here and drop in and breathe and settle the nervous system.
Exactly. A commitment to what's actually happening right here, right now.
So brilliantly said. A commitment to what's actually happening right here and right now. That's so smart to think about when you're wanting to stay engaged in a conversation with someone, or especially if it's uncomfortable. Would you agree?
Totally agree. Yeah. And that's what I do in the embodiment practices I do with the men. We replicate these situations where they actually learn to stay in connection through pain. And I have various sadistic ways to induce the pain.
Oh, and that's in the book?
No, these are things that I don't quite describe in the book that are just personal practices I teach to my clients.
Okay. So I was going to say, because I was like, wow, I either had completely dissociated during that chapter or I just didn't let it sink in. So that's interesting. So you'll have to.
I'm actually probably this year, I'm coming out with an online course for all my embodiment practices. So people can share in those, even if they're not my clients.
Is that going to be out in 2020 or 2021?
Yeah, you can actually pre-order it right now on my website.
That's great. Well, plug your website real quick. What's your website?
Yeah, GSYoungblood.com.
Okay, great.
That's the way to go. And you can get the book on Amazon, obviously Instagram and Facebook pages. And then for the men, there's a discussion group called The Masculine in Relationship. It's a men-only group. That's a private group that we discuss relationship challenges.
Oh, beautiful. The only one we haven't touched on from the blueprint, if you want to go there, is structure and what it looks like to set structure for the relationship. And this one I find particularly interesting when it comes to the distinction between what it's like to lead in the relationship versus call all the shots, right?
Yeah.
And what it looks like to set a structure that provides a container and some guardrails and some guidance, and is also still inclusive of the woman in the relationship. So how do you frame up that structure and get in building that in the relationship?
Yeah, my experience is I'm going to generalize here, so just give me some latitude. But the feminine is wanting, you know, some penetrative directionality from their masculine partner, with inclusion of their own needs and preferences. And I'll just sort of pause and let that sort of a long phrase, but I'll let that sink in. It's like you want us to come with a point of view. You know, in business school, I had a professor. He's like, you got to have a view. You know, if you're going to exist in the business world, you got to have a view, and then operate from that, and then, you know, change as necessary. And the feminine, at the energetic level, the feminine wants the masculine to come in with some kind of direction and view. But then, because we're talking about modern, strong women, they want to be included as well. And so it's kind of like, baby, I think that we should go to X tonight. How does that land for you? Or I want to go out to dinner to either the Japanese place or the Greek place? Like, how do either of those land for you? So I'm not saying, what do you want to do? I'm actually stopping to form an opinion, which most men don't even do. But then I'm including you. How does that land for you? And if you trust me enough, you know that you can either say A or B, or you can be like, I don't want to do either of those. And then I won't go into like being hurt because you didn't take my suggestions. I'll say, oh, how about the Thai place that we kept saying that we wanted to go to? So I'm again bringing the direction, but I'm including you. And I think in our earlier video we used it's like providing the riverbank so you can flow, but within that you can flow however you want and have a lot of discretion. And I think we also use the tango example of the lead providing a strong structure, but he also leaves space for you to embellish and for you to have to improvise on your own. And that's the dance, literally and metaphorically, that I think feels good.
So something that you said stuck out so much is the how does it land for you? So it's sort of like that checking in with your partner to get a sense from her, to allow her to have her voice. And so in that way, you are also creating an environment of allowing her to have a voice, and not just steamrolling over her with your decisions and your opinions. But yet you're still taking a stance, which I think is so important, to do that delicately, where you are taking that stance, you are putting the opinions and the roots in the ground, but it's allowing for there to be some flexibility in that, that brings her expression into the context.
Yeah, it's the inclusion part. So this is the structure the guy's providing. He's providing a structure by which there's inclusion, as you said. But one of the things I say is like you don't have to, the masculine doesn't have to make the decisions. Masculine's just got to make sure that decisions get made. So he's facilitating the process forward. So a decision gets made. There's clarity for everybody. Whether or not he makes that decision could be totally irrelevant. It could be that I'm in a relationship with somebody and I know a decision's got to get made, but I know it's like her decision. Like maybe it's a decision to like her for, is she going to put her parents in an old folks home or something like that, where it's really more of her decision, but she's been procrastinating and I see her procrastinating. So I create some structures like, baby, we're going to sit down and we're going to spend an hour and we're going to research your options. And by the end of that, you're going to make a decision on this because you've got to quit procrastinating on this. And I'm not even going to talk to you until we sit down and do this. And so that he's provided structure, but she's still got to make the decision. And so I think that's an example of what the masculine can bring, because she's obviously off in a procrastination spiral, I'll just leave it at that.
Well, so. No, I actually remember reading that in the book and thinking, oh, this is so genius, because he's also showing up for her in that moment, which again, just is like adding to the safety and this leadership element of the dynamic of the blueprint that you're talking about. And they each one of these, the respond versus react, safety, and structure, they each support each other. It's not like you could just do one and that's it. You're just going to respond, react. Respond versus react helps to build the safety. And that's a structure that, is something that you have to be conscious of building. And so it's like there's a structure of responding versus react, and that creates safety. There's a structure of the procrastination that creates safety. So it's all around, allowing her to relax a little bit and not have to be operating in the doer mode all the time.
Yep, totally. And I want to just elaborate on one thing you said.
Sure.
So if you over-index on respond versus react, you're going to be kind of that stiff, like military guy, like, this type. They think they're being masculine, but they're kind of just like bunged up. And they don't react to anything because they're just so clenched and tight. So you can't over-index on that. If you over-index on provide structure, you are an alpha male misogynist. Like you're just alpha bro.
Yeah, that's the toxic masculine that everyone flares up about when they hear masculine alone. They think that you're talking about that side of masculine.
Yeah. And if you over-index on create safety, guess what? You're a nice guy because you're so safe for everybody that like there's no edge to the whole thing and there's no attraction. So you're right. This is an integrated, blueprint that you got to really embody all three, and that's what feels good.
Well, I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation or other conversation. I hope we'll have many, many more conversations. Is there any one last piece of advice that you would, or maybe guidance may be better, for guys who are with a strong woman and maybe feeling at the end of the road.
Stop blaming her.
So take responsibility.
Yeah, you're not taking blame. You're saying, I am the solution. This is what you're saying to yourself. I don't care who's the problem. I am the solution.
Yes.
And what that means is I'm going to change my way of being, because if you're at the end of your rope, like you said, you've got to give this the best chance and make sure you've left it all on the field, to use a sports analogy. And if you kind of showed up and you're not grounded, but you're reactive, if you don't really provide structure, and if you don't create safety, like, of course your woman's all crazy and acting up all the time. Like, what did you expect? So you bring it first by learning these principles. If it doesn't work at that point, then what you know is you've got a woman who is maybe just really irreparably wounded because of her own past, and maybe it's not the right relationship for you. Maybe she needs to take her own journey, but until you really bring it, you don't know that. And you will be amazed, man, at how quickly she can change in certain ways when you start doing these three things. You'll be like, I didn't know it could be this way. It's crazy. And do we have a minute? Can I
Yeah.
give one anecdote?
Yeah.
So I actually, took a little trip with my ex-wife to drop our son off at college. And so we got some time together. We don't spend a lot of time together.
Yeah.
And I was different because I'm a different person than I was 10 years ago. And I'm embodying these principles in my life. So I was taking care of everything on this little 2-day trip to drop him off. And I took care of all the logistics, and I kind of just led. And she just was able to just kick back and relax. And she could have done it all herself. She's super capable. She was the most relaxed I've ever seen her. And the reason I'm telling that, this is a very personal story, but I actually, like, it's rare that you get to kind of like go back in time and see if you could have changed things, but it was kind of a facsimile of that, right? Like, I knew I was different, and so she showed up different. And so to me, that was just another data point that even in situations that you think are absolutely irrecoverable, they're actually not in most cases.
Oh, I love that. I mean, it is hard to look in retrospect, but it's so beautiful to see that, like, when you change, the world around you changes in response, right?
Totally.
And that is a perfect example of how that can be illustrated, and whether that was also part of her change contributing to that, and maybe she was also in her surrender and allowing. We will never know, but the fact that you were able to show up in a completely different way in context speaks to, when we change, the world around us changes in response. So great.
Yes, it does.
Well, this has been wonderful. So people can find you at your website. What's your handle on Instagram?
GS Youngblood, MIR, masculine in relationships. So MIR.
Is that the best place to find you?
Yeah, I probably have more content on Facebook, so GS Youngblood 1. But either place.
Okay, great. Well, this has been wonderful, and I can't wait to catch up with you again soon.
Likewise, Jocelyn. Thanks so much. This was great. Enjoyed it.
Okay, so there you have it, an excellent conversation with GS Youngblood, the author of The Masculine in Relationship, a blueprint for inspiring the trust, lust, and devotion of a strong woman. As ever, I'm Jocelyn Johnson. I'm the founder of Happy Partners Project. If you are interested in starting a relationship check-in process, head to happypartnersproject.com. Follow us on Instagram at the same handle, Happy Partners Project, and find all of your dating, relationship, marriage, advice, tips, tricks for building a long-lasting, sustainable, healthy, happy relationship. And with that, we will see you next time.